Okay. Church. If you look at your front page again, you can see that the churchyard is a keyhole shape. It's a very peculiar shape. And then you can see what I mean. You can see the churchyard is the shape of a keyhole. 1840. Originally, the churchyard is circular. The circular churchyard is a dead giveaway to an archaeologist because circular churchyards predate the Normans. So again, if we were looking just at the archaeology, we'd have looked at this church and we would have said that's a pre-Norman church, it's a Dark Age church because the churchyard is circular. And then if you look on the third page, you can see an example of a completely circular churchyard at St Illtyd in Carmarthenshire. Okay. Now you might know that one of the words, there are two words for church in Welsh. One is stan and the other is eglwys. Eglwys comes from the Latin ecclesia, it's a medieval word. Stan is the older word, but the original meaning of the word stan was a fence, a hurdle fence. And on top of a bank, they would take a circular bank and ditch and put a hurdle fence on the top and build their church inside. So originally the stan was the fence. Then it came to mean the churchyard, enclosed by the fence, and then it came to mean the church itself. So if we're archaeologists looking just at the evidence on the ground, we would say it's a Dark Age church, pre-Norman church, and it's dedicated to St Illtyd. So it's likely that the original church was built in the 5th or 6th century. So that's when all the other Illtyd churches are built. Fine, that's great. That's from the evidence on the ground, and it's almost entirely wrong. Because there's other evidence that points in an entirely different direction. So the churchyard is circular. The church does date to before the Norman conquest. It is a Dark Age church. But remember, I said about that little poem, dating back to the 9th or 10th century. And Llanhilleth, bears Owain, it says. In Llanhilleth is the grave of Owain. The original dedication to the church was not Illtyd at all. The earliest record of the church being dedicated to St Illtyd comes from the 18th century. It's only 200 years. Before that, it was dedicated to Heledd. Heledd is a girl's name. It's a very popular name now. There are lots of Heleds on Radio Cymru. It was very popular 20 years ago. So who's Heledd then? Who is St Heledd? Heledd is a 6th century princess from Powys, from what's now Montgomeryshire, right up in the north of Montgomeryshire. In fact, the area around Oswestry and Shrewsbury was then in Wales. The Anglo-Saxons come along and conquer that bit of Wales and kill the prince, a man called Cynfilla. And his sister was Heledd. And there's very old poems again in the Black Book of Carmarthen and other books which date back to the 8th, 9th century about Heledd and about the Anglo-Saxons killing her brother. And what happens in the poetry and the saga is that her brother is killed and then Heledd and her handmaidens wander off because they all go mad with grief and they wander off. Well, we don't know where they wander to and we don't know why this church then, 200 or 300 years later, is dedicated to St Heledd. The only church in Wales dedicated to unique dedication. There are no other churches dedicated to Heledd. And we don't know why. If I knew why, I'd be teaching archaeology in the university. Not standing on a mountain. So it's a very unusual, it's a very interesting thing. Why Heledd? We just don't know. So, the likelihood is that back in the 9th, 10th century, there was a wooden church on this site. A small wooden church in its round bailey. And just on the edge of the bailey, as we know, there was a Bronze Age burial mound. So when the Normans come along, they've got a ready-made enclosure. Because remember that in the Middle Ages and in the Dark Ages, no gravestones. People are buried in the churchyard with no markers at all. There's a clear, open space. That's why in the 17th century, you heard people playing ball, handball, bando, and all these games in churchyards, and you think, well, you couldn't play football here, could you? But because there are no gravestones, people don't start putting gravestones up until the very end of the 17th century. So, and then our next record of the place is the 1160s. The white monks at Llanhilleth take over the parish, and it's likely that they build the church that we see today. Now, the bulk of it dates to the 13th century, to the period about 1275. That's the nave, and certainly the bottom half of the tower. I will show you why we know that in a moment. But this end, the chancel, is older than that. And how do we know that? Well, there are two things. When you go inside and look at the chancel arch, it's round. That's a Norman feature. Later on, they're Gothic arches. And the door at the front is a Gothic pointed arch, dating to the 13th century. And also, if you look very carefully here, you can see a blocked window. See a very little, just a simple rectangular window. Nothing fancy. There have been two windows in that end as well. So this part is the oldest part. Probably dates back to the 12th century, the 1170s, 1180s. Then later on, they add the nave, say about 1250, 1275. And there's an interesting little feature there as well if you come along. Now, we've got a western, as we all know, churches always face east-west, more or less, apart from in Absalom, of course. They might go facing north-south, isn't it? I suppose people in Absalom have to be different to the rest of Christendom. So the churches face east-west, and as we know, we've got a west tower and a west door. But before that tower was added, and we don't really know when the tower was added, but the door of the tower certainly dates about 1250. I'll explain to you why we know that for certain when we go round back on the front. But what's obvious is that at some stage there was a south door. Because you can see these stones here? Well, that's not a collapse, that's not the wall falling out being popped back up. That's what's left of an opening. That's what's left of a doorway. So there was originally a door there, a southern door, which is quite normal, because most churches in Gwent start off as one square building like that, little cell almost, and then the nave is added, and there's usually a southern door, which is very sensible. We all know it's very sensible, because we spend a lot of time here, and the weather blows right through the door, isn't it? All the wind, comes from the west. It's a really daft place to have the door. The most sensible place is the south end, which is sheltered from the worst of the weather. So there was originally a door there, and then at some stage, the tower is added, and the west door is added in the tower. Now, there are conflicting stories about the tower. There are some sources that say the tower was built in the 19th century, which is absolute tosh. That tower was not built in the 19th century. It's certainly built in the 13th century, part of it, the bottom half of it, probably. And then at some stage later on, there is other work done to the tower. Now, whether that's in the 19th century or not, we don't know. And we go to stand at the corner and explain why we know that. As you can see, the tower has a little change in it. The bottom bit is broader than the top bit. The other thing to notice is that the join, if you notice where the broad bit and the narrow bit join up, and follow the line across to the downpipe there, can you also see in the masonry of the end of the wall here a line? Just there. A difference in the stonework. At some stage, the roof of the nave has been raised, and at the same time, work has been done to the tower. Well, we don't know when that is. There's no way of dating that. What we can say is these are little Norman windows with a little funny little arched top. That at the top is a fairly crude copy. Can you see? But again, we don't know when. So is the tower built in two stages? It started in the 13th later on? We just don't know. How do we know it's the 13th century?